I dare Mr. Fauntleroy to try to debate me in front of him. I dare him to try to debate me in front of the federal employees as much as I've done for the federal employees. I dare him to discuss retail employment downtown. He'd better keep quiet on education. I don't want to hear a cotton-picking thing out of him about the hospitals, because I desegregated the hospitals in this city and made it possible for black doctors to practice everywhere. Now, name the issues.
I saw him kill a truck driver. I've seen him kill 100 men in this city. And I've seen these same familiar faces that are sitting in the audience protest. And I wondered what the world is all about. I'm not a very religious man, but in fact, I'm not religious at all.
Now, we got old, bald-headed, toothless men that are around who are talking about their pride and talking about the fact that they are going to be disgraced or we are not going to lose a war. We have lost a war. We have lost our self-respect. We have lost our civilization. We've lost our human dignity and our goddamn decency by killing people in Vietnam, in Africa, and everywhere else. Finally, we got a garrison on every continent and a flotilla in every sea. And we're prepared to kill anybody and everybody who disagrees with our right to exploit, murder, and maim the rest of civilization. And I say to the rest of mankind, hell no, out now. The hell with it.
We are like Spartacus's army. Broken sword, no resources, against the Roman legions. And I like to fight that way. I don't know about you.
For well over 300 years, blacks had been in the United States demanding through various means to be accepted as equals in this predominantly white society. At no other time, though, in the history of the civil rights movement was the issue so forced into public attention than in the late 1950s and early 60s. For blacks, it was an era of freedom rides, marches, and forced confrontations. It was a struggle led primarily at first by the church. Leaders like Dr. King, Powell, McKissick, Foreman, and Evers espoused nonviolence, but often they were met by white resistance, destruction, and death. To other black leaders, nonviolence did not make sense, and so a parallel militant movement was born. Julius Hobson was a part of this movement.
Paper! Paper! Paper!
Born in Alabama in 1922, Hobson came to Washington in the early 50s. He began organizing civic groups and was finally chosen to head the Congress of Racial Equality here. Hobson, a Marxist by doctrine, perceived the black struggle from a purely economic.
You would consider a socialist outline. I am a socialist. I believe in the socialist economics of Karl Marx. I don't believe that we can have a crazy quilt jungle economic setup like we got now, where you got millionaires and paupers, half the people starving to death, and the other half with so damn much money till they can't count it. So it was, the idea was to center core around that and create that socialist mentality in core, which said under the Constitution, damn it, we want to divide up some of these resources, and we want our share.
I used to see him, listen to him on radio, and read about him in the paper, and we had a little group called the Nonviolent Action Group, which was working with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was primarily based in the South. But since we were here in Washington, D.C., I thought that we couldn't turn a blind spot on what was going on in Washington, and since Mr. Julius Hobson seemed to be the man closest to our line of thinking, that is, not only was he a theoretician, but also a man of practice, we decided to contact him. And when we contacted him, he outlined his program on agitation and trying to bring about raising the level of consciousness of black people in the North. We joined with him, and he did do many, many things. I mean, one of the things that, of course, I think we all learned from him was that you can analyze a situation carefully and then decide where to put the pressure points. And as long as you knew where to put the pressure point and put it precisely and exactly, you could get results, desired results.
And to Hobson, that meant jobs and economic security. He began with demonstrations against local merchants, and then he took on the federal government. This was perhaps his most difficult fight, but also his most rewarding one. Over the years, he represented thousands of federal workers, first on the streets, then in a congressional hearing. Armed with facts of discrimination and intimidation, he made it quite clear that the federal government was not an equal opportunity employer. Many stories still linger. Mrs. Esther Mallory, a mother of 4 with an invalid husband, worked at HEW. In 1969, that agency tried to suspend her, and the memories are still painful. As she recalls, what she maintains was a deliberate scheme of intimidation and harassment.
My misfortune, yet they harassed me, they intimidated me, they even told me that I could leave. But where was I going? How could I afford to support my children? So they did everything that they could to get me out of the agency. I went on the Hill, I discussed my problem, and they said to look for another job.
What did Mr. Hobson say? How did he react to your case?
He himself thought that it was a very bad way of treating me, and he actually cried. He was touched.
You say that Julius Hobson helped you. Did anyone else make an attempt to help?
No one else made an attempt to help me.
Mrs. Mallory, what did your husband say while all of this was going on?
Well, he had a stroke during that time from worry. He fell and broke his rib. That was worry. He was in intensive care at the Washington Hospital Center. And I feel that because of the maltreatment which I received at the agency, this aggravated his condition. And on the 4th of April of this year, my husband passed away. He would often talk about it. He would cry. Sometimes I would get up at night and he would be crying and crying.
The civil rights reawakening of the 60s had also rekindled the cry for home rule. But in spite of efforts by Kennedy and Johnson, it wasn't until 1967 that a compromise with Congress ended with Walter Washington being appointed mayor in a makeshift government. The name mayor itself was a question to many, since he really had little power. But to Hobson, the choice of the man told the story, and he said so, continuing to irritate the establishment.
Well, I think Mr. Washington's a good man from Mr. Johnson's point of view. If you would ask me to describe him, I would think that 3 words which describe most of the appointees, black appointees, Mr. Johnson makes. I'd say colorless, tasteless, and odorless would be a good description of Mr. Washington.
Neither Hobson or Washington could foresee what would happen in just 8 months. The frustrations Hobson had been talking about erupted, and the Capitol had never been subjected to anything like it. When it was over, the district was in search of a new direction. Months before the riot, a group had been formed, but it was a strained relationship between moderates and militants, and it seemingly perpetuated the age-old struggle between those leaders who wanted change within the system and those who demanded more direct action. For 2 years, black leadership pulled and shoved the system from both sides. The result edged the district closer to home rule. By 1970, there was to be a non-voting delegate, but again, this was a compromise.
The idea that came out of the clear blue sky, this is a real possibility.
Disturbingly similar to the one that resulted in a mayor. Another position with no power, and Hobson entered the traditional political arena where facts, analysis, and documentation didn't seem to carry the same persuasive power. But he didn't change.
I think that there are ways to offer Mr. Fauntleroy and the meaningless Mr. Nevius an opportunity to debate in his holy roller position on any subject that he wants to choose at any time. I think that the public ought to demand a discussion of the issues. And Mr. Fauntleroy can pick the issue if he wants to. I'll even preach a sermon if I have to do that.
Sing a song.
Or sing a solo and do some soft shoe.
He maintained his maverick style and his basic unwillingness to compromise, which is the heart of the political system. He argued that statehood was the only way to get true self-determination, but many people felt this was unrealistic. So the inability to persuade voters on the statehood issue and his verbal attacks, which angered white and black middle-class voters, cost him the election.
We profess to favor freedom in here, and we will not depreciate agitation. So statehood party, let's go and let's keep it together.
Of all the arenas, Hobson's fight for equal education is perhaps best known. In spite of the Supreme Court ruling ending segregation, Hobson soon found that poor and black children were still not learning. And he fought it, writing an abundance of articles, staging sit-ins and boycotts. He called the first appointed school board a bunch of Uncle Toms for supporting the district's track system, administered by former school superintendent Carl Hansen. Under the track system, a form of ability grouping, children were tested in the 6th grade and put into one of 4 tracks. Hobson claimed the system was economically discriminatory because test scores distorted the skills of low-income children and they were placed into lower tracks with little upward movement. He maintained that low-income areas were tracked out of receiving a fair share of public monies for the schools. So he went to court and he won. And the impact of this suit was felt throughout the country.
I think it set a precedent. It was the basis for some other suits which have had a wider implication. One is the Serrano versus Priest in California, which deals with equal distribution of resources in the schools. And another is the Van Dussault versus Hatfield in Minnesota, and the Rodriguez versus San Antonio. And some suits since then, like in Richmond, Virginia, and I can't recall the other, which have challenged the unequal distribution of tax monies. I would say most certainly that Julius Hobson was at least 100 years ahead of his time, and that is why people really did not understand, but one day maybe they will.
By 1969, the district saw its first elected school board. It came about in part from Hobson's school suit. His work helped make him an easy winner for an at-large seat. He got more votes than anyone else. But his demand for a new direction hurt him. At the first organizational meeting, a moderate was named board president. Hobson gave the board a warning.
Well, I appreciate very much the support of the community. I think that my mandate was from the community. I've been making brick without straw so long until it won't matter. I've got something called a right decree. I'm on the Board of Education, and they're going to abide by it as long as my name is Julius Hobson.
But it still hurt. The next year, he refused to run at large and ran instead in Ward 2. He did not campaign effectively, and other board members did, working hard to defeat him. He lost. Again, it may have been his style. An old friend talked about why some did not understand him.
People generally tend to think in terms of themselves. A black, prosperous man, or a prosperous black man, whichever way we put it, feels pretty much the same as a prosperous white man. And he wants to protect what he has. A status quo in climate is good in the minds of people who are comfortable in status quo. But even people who feel discomfort in a status quo situation don't understand the challenge of change. And they don't realize the need to heighten the consciousness and sensitivity in a way which creates anxiety and sometimes even temporary chaos. These things are sometimes necessary to change. Julius understands this and understood this. It was necessary. So people, therefore, generally cannot feel comfortable with his views or the way he expresses them, even though they may feel comfortable with his goals.
I, as I said before, as a trained technician, could see that in the years when we were running up and down the street demonstrating, that the economic position of black families in the United States, particularly lower middle black families, was deteriorating. The family income gap between white and black families widened from 1960 to 1970. you see. And while the middle-class blacks were running up and down the street talking about the right to go to Trader Vic's, the average black wasn't eating. I disagree with the exploitation of the blacks by the blacks as much as I disagree with the exploitation of blacks by the whites. And the painful thing is that I see right now black politicians telling the blacks the same thing that the politicians told the whites. When I was a boy in Alabama, that nigger howls every night at 12 o'clock. He eats babies. He's ignorant. He wouldn't know what a steak tastes like. So let him eat fatback. There's no need to give him any more. And some of the black politicians, if you look at the campaigns that are being run, are doing the same thing right now in the black community. I'm at odds with that. I'm also at odds with pie in the sky. And the black community has long enough had Jesus on their backs. I think they got to get him off of their backs and get rid of the pie in the sky and deal with the worldly hopes men set their hearts upon and quit being led by a lot of verb-splitting, Alabama accent preachers whose only objective is to get themselves a Cadillac and get some personal creature comforts. Now, you got evidence of that all over town.
Julius, it is said that you could die any day. If you do, and if you quote-unquote meet the Maker, if there is one, what will you say to him?
I don't know. That's, meeting the Maker is so far-fetched from my thinking and so far from the atheistic background of mine until it's hard, it's a joke. I don't feel guilty for a goddamn thing that I've done on earth. I withdraw that and repeat a statement by, I believe it was Henry David Thoreau, who said that what demons possess me that I behave so well under the circumstances. And if I have anything to apologize for, it's my good conduct under the circumstances. So if there is a Maker, and I meet him, well, I'll meet him. I don't know what'll happen when I meet him. I'm sure he's busy as hell if he made all this. And I'm so infinite, well, maybe finite, until he might not have time to deal with me. But if I meet him and he's got any sense of justice and got any time, I'd like to talk to him. If I don't get a chance, then I won't. That's just removed from my thinking. I believe that Julius Hobson was born May 29, 1922, and that someday there'll be a year and a day that will end that. And I think that'll be the end of it. And I think if there is any life after death, it's in Julius Hobson Jr., or in Jean Hobson, my daughter, or in my granddaughter, or in any person who might take up where I left off, or who might be interested in what I'm interested in. And in terms of a Maker, that strikes of such utter ridiculousness until I can't entertain. What would I tell you the Maker? Say, look, Maker, half the goddamn people in the District of Columbia are hungry, and you in charge of stuff that grows. Well, why don't you let the stuff grow so they can eat? That's the first thing I want to ask him. I don't want to ask him why he won't take my soul. To hell with that. I want to ask him, why don't these kids eat? You know, why do you let people suffer? Maker, explain to me this, maybe before I go to sleep. That's what I'd like to know from any Maker. You know, what is there about Julius Hobson that he merits a place to live, and a balcony, and a patio, and an automobile that is different where Sam Jones does not merit it? You know, what did he do? And why can't we even some of this up, this justice, you know? And what is this definition of love that we've been fighting about and talking about on earth, you know? Can you tell us a couple of these things before you condemn us to wherever in the hell you're going to condemn us to? You know, you owe us that explanation. That's my position to the Maker, and if he doesn't want to talk about that, the hell with him. I don't want to talk to him.